Hey everybody, this is John Schwabish from policyviz.com bringing you another dataviz critique. This one from CNN.com and an article posted in early May of 2021 from Nicole Chavez and Priya Krishnakumar. This article is about variations in Asian Americans or across Asian Americans who are often, at least in a lot of the data that are collected, are presented as one monolithic group, and it's more complex and there's more variation in that singular group. So let's dive in. We get through some text here and we're going to get to our first visualization. There's a few visualizations here that we'll talk about. So the first one is a unit chart that breaks out these common aggregate groups of people who identify as Asian and Pacific Islanders in the United States. So we see, for example, people who identify as East Asian. There's 8.6 million people who identify as East Asian. And we've broken down, or the authors have broken down, this group into these major categories. So we see 4.9 million people identify as Chinese, 1.9 million identify as Korean, et cetera, et cetera. And so you get a nice view here from this unit chart of the variation in these aggregate groups. Now, some people have criticized charts like these, unit charts like these, as requiring us to basically count boxes, which I guess is true, but also for me, like, it's pretty clear immediately how big some of these groups are relative to other groups. So I really like this particular visualization. The annotation is really good. One really small minor thing is the box for those who identify as Malaysian is off just a little bit. Obviously not a big deal, but when you're doing a critique, kind of looking at all of it, so that should be moved over a little bit. But no big deal. We can keep scrolling. We don't need to worry about that. So let's go down and we get a map. We get a bubble map here. So we can identify the top, not only where people live, so we've got the bubbles that show population across the country, but also the top 5. Notice they've labeled them in the map itself, just with some simple annotation here, and then a bar chart that sits below it. And this, I think, is a really good approach when you think about visualizing geographic data, is to combine your map with another visualization type, right? It's really hard for me to figure out how different Honolulu is, for example, from Santa Clara and from Orange County. And of course, it'd be really hard for me to, or impossible to, break out each of the different groups within those cities. Imagine this being a pie chart. I couldn't figure out those slices, right? So the bar chart down here does a really nice job of showing that. For my money, I'm not sure I need all the percentage signs on these labels, just trying to clear out some of the repetitive stuff. But, again, is it a big deal? No, it's probably fine. But, it says it right here, percent of Asian population. So do I need all the percentage signs? Probably not. But I'm sure the authors and media organizations like CNN are trying to make it exceptionally clear that these are percentages, that there's no doubt that this over here on this bar over here, which is far away from the label over here, is 30%. So, okay, so it's not that big of a deal. But as you go about making your own visualizations, you might want to consider removing as much of that repetitive labeling as you can. All right, let's dive a little bit further. And now we get a bar chart of median household income among Asian populations in the United States, varying here from those who identify as Indian down to those who identify as Burmese. And then a little dot plot, little strip chart here that shows the percent of the population with at least a bachelor's degree. Again, you see this huge variation from 16% on the left edge to 78% on the right edge. Now, when I saw this I felt both bad that I see this and vindicated, because with my colleague Alice Fang at the Urban Institute, we created something similar to this. We did a very similar story, but focused on poverty rates among the Asian and Pacific Islander community. We again use some of those major categories that are used in a lot of economic research, and you can see again this wide variation, for example, in poverty rates across these different groups. So I felt both vindicated that this graph type seemed to be useful. CNN is using it. So and Priya, who's been on my podcast, does fantastic work. So I'm going to chalk that up to success. And also just a little jealous that that it ended up on CNN and mine's on the Urban Institute blog, which is great, but trying to get more viewers, not exactly CNN. So we can go down one more little chart down here, a little bar chart. Again, simple, straight to the point. Again, number of people here, and you get that information in this simple bar chart. Finally, representation in Congress. We've got two visualizations here. So there's this sort of standard, I don't even know if I call it standard, but this parliamentary or congressional type of visualization that fills in these circles, which is kind of fun and interesting to look at. But then there's this bar chart down here as well that gives me, another view of the data. And I like both of the visualizations. It's also kind of interesting why they included both of these visualizations. I'd be curious to know why the authors wanted to include both of these. You clearly get, obviously the number is different, but you could have included the percentage up here in the subtitle or in the label or something like that. So I don't know, it's an interesting decision, I think, to put both. I like having both of them there. It certainly doesn't take away from the story or from the entire webpage, but I think it's interesting that both of these visuals were included. And so that wraps up the story as we go down into the ads and into the other things to read. Scrolling back up, you see it's a really nice piece. Has lots of different visualizations, gives you lots of different perspectives on the data. So a really nice story from CNN.com by Nicole Chavez and Priya Krishnakumar, and I really enjoyed it. So nice job, I think, personally. If you have thoughts, if you have complaints, if you think they could have done something different, let me know in the notes below this video. So come back to this playlist to learn more about dataviz and to see some other dataviz critiques. This is John from policyviz.com.